Okay, so this practice builds on the last several that we've done. So we're still working with external sensory noticing, but I want to introduce two skills or concepts to kind of refine that external noticing or exteroception process. So the first of these is I'm calling toggling. I hope I'm using that word correctly. That's the word that keeps coming to mind. But it's an intentional shifting of your awareness from one thing to another thing. And the second one is titration, which comes from the science world and is that process of adding one thing just a little bit at a time so that the the observer or the scientist can, I think originally it was like to be able to mark that exact moment when the chemical change happens, right? So you're just adding like a drop at a time of the activating ingredient. And the invitation, well, to practice this is to approach your sensory noticing in that way. So where you have conscious or intentional choice around where your awareness is going. And then you also have kind of a, sensory pipette, or if whatever image works for you, of intaking or receiving the input of your sensory noticing in a way that is slow and observable of the effect in your system so that it can be just right for you. Okay, so feel free to take a little wiggle, a little yawn, a little shake. And I'll just invite you to start with letting your senses be open, looking around the room you're in, being aware of sounds, taking your hands around the space, being aware of touch and the felt sense of objects in your periphery. And I'll invite you to, let's, for the sake of this exercise, start by noticing one thing through your senses: sound, smell, taste, touch, sight. One thing that is pleasant to your senses to notice. So there's this little tree branch that's part of a bookshelf in my room over here, and it has like a really kind of rough texture, and it's firm and a little bit cool to the touch, and I'm just going to use that as my one thing. And just take a moment to kind of let your awareness take in the one thing that you're choosing to direct your attention to that's a little bit pleasant. And you can imagine we'll work this a few times, but you can imagine just like kind of receiving nourishment from the pleasantness of that contact with that object being. See if you can have kind of a friendly gaze or internal gaze towards this element in your environment, this companion in your ecosystem. All right, and then we're just going to shift awareness. So you might notice something in your environment that is maybe a little irritating or a little unpleasant. Let me see. So I'm noticing there's this sort of bunch in my pants that's like pushing into my ankle and in a just slightly unpleasant way. Just this kind of a slightly unpleasant pressure in my ankle from the way my pants are bunching around my feet. So just in the same way, I am going to take a moment just to notice that place in my skin, that sensory location of touch. And it's a constant, firm pressure. And it's a little bit warm and just a little uncomfortable. All right, so just taking a moment there. And in the same way, just like you were kind of seeing a companion in the space, maybe a friend, maybe a slightly annoying friend. I'm just going to be with that sensation, noticing. Yeah. Okay. And now I am going to toggle my awareness between those two places. So taking a moment to go back to that first sensation, the one that's a little bit pleasant. And I'm noticing it takes a little bit of discipline, I'll say. It takes a little bit of direct kind of guiding of my attention back to that pleasant sensation. Just feeling the bark of this little tree branch. And I'm noticing just that's kind of sending some softness across my shoulders and into the top of my chest. And I'll just offer some gratitude to that little tree branch for softening my system a little bit, and then toggle my awareness back to that slightly uncomfortable place, that pressure in my ankle. So just go back to that second sensation. And there might be a corresponding effect through your body. Like I notice there's just a little bit of tightness through the base of my pelvis moving up. And we haven't really focused on internal sensing, but you might already be there. And you might not, and that's okay. So just letting yourself, maybe with some deliberation, although unpleasant sensation is easier or often, pulls out our attention more easily. So you can go there for a moment. Okay. And then I'll invite you just with that, again, that little bit of discipline to move back to the first sensation. And this time, I invite you to imagine there's in your awareness, in your noticing, it's like an aperture of a camera that you could widen the view. So in that first pleasant sensation, this is that first little bit of titration. Just imagine adding, if it feels good, if it feels just right, you can see is there a little bit more that you can take in from that pleasant place of noticing, a little bit more to receive from that friendly being that you are noticing. I often find that deepening my breath a little bit is sort of that bodily gesture, kind of corresponds to that bodily receiving. Maybe that is useful to you, just taking in a little bit more, not too much. And then we'll just toggle back to that slightly unpleasant sensation. And again, kind of imagining the aperture of the camera, like maybe is there a little more that you can take in? Or maybe your system wants just a little bit less from that place of noticing. Or maybe staying right where you are is just right, is just fine. But just knowing that the option is there to take in a little more, to take in a little less, 1 degree more, 1 degree less. Okay, and just we'll invite you to go back to the first sensation. Let's just end in that kind of more, on that more pleasant focal point, because it's usually a little more difficult to sustain. I'm just going back to that first sensation, toggling back, and just gauging there, titrating there, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. What would be just right for your system to be in relationship with this sensation in your environment? And then just letting your body kind of adjust or acclimate accordingly. You don't have to know why. I've been finding that little roll in my shoulders, or a little open, closing through my jaw, a little shimmy, shake, little sighs can feel good. Kind of like you're moving those corresponding sensations through your whole system. Okay, and then you can just sort of come out of the practice with a little bigger movements or a little widening of the whole aperture of your noticing. Yeah, so I'll just end with offering like the connection for folks, or could I say more explicitly the connection that there's this a subtlety to toggling and to titration that's at least intended to not be just like distracting away from a sensation that's unpleasant or even that's pleasant, or dissociating, kind of leaving your sensory noticing altogether. When you're toggling, all the sensations, or both of those sensations, are still present. You're just having choice in what comes into the foreground and what moves into the background. Okay, so it may seem sort of like, what's the point of that in this sort of very benign environment, practice place? But I'll invite you to consider, like, when the intensity of sensation is higher, when it's more emotionally charged, when there's more thoughts attached to it, it can be really valuable to have the skill of being able to widen the hyperfixation that can happen on whatever is highest intensity in the moment, which is often the unpleasant sensation or the negative sensation. So the toggling helps to kind of deprioritize the thing of highest sensation, so you're able to expand your ability to perceive beyond that single high intensity sensation. And then with the titration, you're also able to kind of expand or contract that receptivity to a place that is digestible for your system in that moment. So a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. Okay. So I will leave that there for today.